Hey everyone, good afternoon. I'm Susan Kaufman. I'm here for Attitude Magazine's ADHD Experts broadcast. Thanks so much for joining us to welcome Dr. Sharon Saline. Belatedly, we had a little technical glitch yesterday, but we're here today and ready to go with a great presentation, helping us prepare for what shapes up to be a very unfamiliar school year. One in which so many schools are going to opt for some sort of hybrid learning model mixed with person and online, very not clear. For kids who are alternative learners, for those with ADHD, with learning disabilities, and more, this educational model, along with all their existing worries about COVID, is just increasing unease and uncertainty to brand new levels. We're certainly hearing that from our readers. So her topic could not be more timely. Thank you so much, Dr. Saline, as always, for being here with us. Before I introduce her and give you her bio, let me just tell you a couple of housekeeping notes. If you're listening to the live webinar right now, you can download the slides by clicking on the event resource tab. You'll see that screen. And some people like to print them out and follow along. If you'd like to purchase a certificate of attendance option, wait for the instructions. They'll come in an email after the live broadcast, maybe 45 minutes afterwards. So give it a minute or two. If you're listening in replay or podcast mode, a few days from now, months from now even, visit the replay page on the Attitude website. It's attitudemag.com/webinar. And this particular one is Back to School Pandemic. To find both the slides, if you'd like to download them, and the certificate of attendance option, which is available to those who are listening in replay or podcast. So we're super pleased to have Dr. Saline with us today. Many of you have listened to her talk in the past and know how helpful she is and how tuned in she is to our audience. You may not know about her background. She has focused her work on ADHD, on anxiety and learning differences, and their impact on school and family for over 30 years. She has a unique perspective. She's a sibling of a child who wrestled with untreated ADHD, as well as decades of academic excellence and clinical experience. So she works with families as they navigate all this confusing mazes of diagnosis and conflict to manage both interventions and connections. Her book, called What Your ADHD Child Wishes You Knew, has received multiple awards, and she recently published the ADHD Solution Deck. She's an international lecturer, workshop facilitator, and a regular contributor to Attitude as well as Psychology Today, as well as a part-time lecturer at the Smith School for Social Work. So, Dr. Saline, thank you so much for joining us again, and we are going to turn it over to you, to the listeners. After Dr. Saline finishes her presentation, she'll be happy to take questions. Please post them at any time they occur to you in the Q&A box. And with that, let me turn it over to Dr. Saline.
Thank you, Susan, and thank you for that beautiful introduction. And thank you so much for inviting me back to Attitude. It's really a pleasure and privilege to be here and be speaking to your readers and your community. So today we're going to discuss how to approach hybrid learning in the fall and manage your family's anxiety and flexibility so that we can make the back to school transition as smooth and successful as it can be. And the first thing I want to say to all of you parents and educators and therapists who are watching is, oh boy, what's been happening? You know, it is a crazy time, and my heart really goes out to all of you. And I hope that I'm able to convey my compassion and empathy for the struggles that you're facing right now today, as well as offer you some solutions. So kids who are alternative learners, and under this umbrella, I consider kids with ADHD, learning disabilities, what we call HFA, high functioning autism, kids with anxiety, depression, or other mental health issues, including trauma. All of these kids, these alternative learners, are going to need extra support for going back and forth, if there's like in school and then there's homeschool, and also in light of the crisis learning that they had to experience in the spring. So we're going to discuss shifting anxiety to curiosity and focusing on what you can control, creating daily routines based on collaboration, realistic expectations, and predictability, addressing the paradox of home learning and home working, and advocating how you can advocate to make sure your child or teen has the supports they need in this odd learning environment. So the spring, as we know, was an emergency. The spring was crisis management learning, and everybody was struggling and juggling to figure out something that we could put together to make school work. We're now circling back with that experience and the knowledge from that experience, hopefully, into a fall that actually is so insecure. And so we can't say for sure it's going to look like this or it's going to look like that. We just don't know. And that's not only uncomfortable for us as parents, but it's very uncomfortable for the students. But what we want to do is to be a little more thoughtful and more prepared for the discomfort that we're having to feel. So I think if you could control the slides, that would be really great for me. Thank you. So I'm just going to say slide when I want the next slide. That would be terrific. So does any of this sound familiar to you? My daughter, Zara, who's 8 years old with ADHD and dyslexia, after a while, she could not handle Zoom anymore. She would run away. She would sit far away. She would do anything but focus. Another parent told me, remote learning was awful. My son's ADHD got the best of him. He is 13 and he defaulted to flight mode in regards to assignment completion, resorted to lying that he was doing them when he wasn't. And another parent said, not having to go to school and deal with other kids was much less distracting for my son, Devlin, who's 11 with ADHD and ASD. He liked being able to see and talk to kids in the online classes or play video games when he wanted. He could moderate the contact. Slide. So we're going to move into our first poll because I want this to be participatory and I want to hear from you. So what is it that your family is most worried about this fall? So I'd like you to take a look at this and take a few minutes and answer this poll. Worried about getting COVID? Combining work and homeschool learning, social adjustment for your kids with peers, academic losses from last year and being behind, or the reality of food, housing, or job insecurity. So what is it that you and your family are most concerned about? This is our first poll. And if we could have the next slide, that would be fantastic. So let's review a little bit of what's been happening in our crazy world. Crisis learning from the spring had many pitfalls. And one of the pitfalls or the side effects was a collective sense of defeat. From the spring emergency. Parents were overwhelmed, students were fed up, teachers didn't really feel like they were able to do their jobs the way they like to, the way they're accustomed to, and everyone left the spring with this great sense of, an exhale, relief, thank goodness that's over. We never thought we'd be where we are now. Students' emotions ran the gamut from being angry, frustrated, lonely, to being relieved, freed from anxiety-provoking social interactions, and enjoying learning at their own pace and schedule. Zoom fatigue was real. Kids, especially alternative learners, lost motivation as they lost peer modeling, in-person teacher instruction and supervision, and the ability to separate home from school, to leave school at school and be able to come home and exhale, get some relief from that. Instead, we saw more social media and gaming to connect with peers. One of my clients told me that one of the hardest parts for her, and she's 13, about online school was that she didn't have the cues from her peers. Oh, this is a time to study. This is what studying looks like. Other people are doing it. I better get started. And finally, once we got through the spring and we gave our collective exhale, glad that was over, summer now brought more complications from managing social distancing, from a lack of childcare or camps or planned activities for kids. And we had to help kids find things to do again while we were working as parents. So let's see some of the results from that poll. And if we could have the next slide, that would be great. So the results from the poll are that 47% of you are concerned about contracting COVID at school. 49% of you are concerned about combining work with at-home learning again. Social adjustments and peers was 27%. Academic losses from last year and being behind, 36%. And food, housing, or job insecurity, 6%. So the majority of you are worried about getting COVID at school, or your kids getting COVID at school, and how to combine working at home and learning at home again in some way. So I want to talk a little bit about the persistent trauma that we've all been experiencing from this persistent anxiety. And it's actually, if you weren't anxious before, most likely because of the trauma of having to stand in uncertainty, or losing your job, or knowing people who died, or not being sure about how you're going to pay your rent, or your child's isolation from peers and anger management issues. You may be experiencing that now. And so in my mind, there are two types of trauma. There's trauma with a capital T, which is single incident trauma, which would be, you have a heart attack, or you're in a car accident, or something, terrible happens to someone that's a single incident trauma. And that differs from what I call trauma with a small t, which is persistent levels of trauma, the paper cuts that you get every day. And those paper cuts every day, that persistent trauma is actually harder to recover from than the single incident trauma, because it's not ending. And that trauma with a small t can be also, pretty major. It could be racism, it could be unemployment. So all of these things come together. And when we have this kind of persistent anxiety, it heightens our anxiety. We are much more likely to live in an awareness and a worry about fight or flight mode. So it's very, very tough for any humans to stand in uncertainty. We're holding our breath. We're waiting for what's going to unfold. But with the health stakes so high right now, and the very real depression you may have experienced, or your kids may have experienced from sheltering in place and being socially disconnected, all of this can feel impossible. And what I've been seeing in recent months, and my clinician friends have also been seeing, is a greater sense of despair and hopelessness. So all of this not knowing about what to expect not only is based on our anxiety, but it perpetuates our anxiety. And it has to do with how we're wired. The amygdala in our emotional brain is prepared. It comes into play for fight or flight. It senses when there's danger, and it wants to help us do something about it. And part of the challenge with the dangers we're experiencing now is we don't feel like we have control. But here's what I want to suggest to you. Instead of persistent worried thoughts, you can control and lower the volume on your anxiety by shifting consciously to curiosity. I wonder what's going to happen, instead of I'm afraid of what's going to happen. Even that small shift in language opens possibilities rather than opening fear. While anxiety shuts you down and predicts negative outcomes, curiosity opens you to possibilities and helps you rely on and inquire about and brainstorm about resilience. And resilience and flexibility are what we need now more than ever. Slide, please. So how are we going to address anxiety about school directly? The first way we want to deal with trauma, whether it's a big T or that small t, perpetual trauma, is by talking about it and validating what's occurring. We want to name, acknowledge, and empathize, not just with the feelings our kids had from the spring, but what we've had. We want to separate what we're experiencing, talk about with peers, away from the ears of our kids, and validate with our kids while we talk to them about what they're experiencing, maybe peppering our conversation with comments saying, like, that was really hard for me too. Or I don't know I'm not sure. Well, I know we're going to figure it out together, but that uncertainty makes me uncomfortable too. So it's powerful to sit with whatever emotions are there and not ignore them. And this is key to processing both anxiety and trauma. And it is our prep work for what's to come, for dealing with what's to come. So we want to notice what's worked. Describe a few successes from the spring and build on them. We want to pay attention to whatever positive shifts, whatever growth mindsets you may have seen, i.e., I can make a mistake and learn from it, rather, I can't. And this is going to help reduce our dread. We want to foster flexibility and resilience, and we want to do that for ourselves and our kids. So how are we going to do that? We're going to talk about health, safety, and social concerns about this fall. You're going to observe your child's behaviors and listen to what they're saying within earshot when they talk to their friends. That's when you'll get to understand some of what they're concerned about or what kind of brave front they're putting on. You're going to be ready to for nighttime conversations. Kids often talk before they go to bed. Particularly teenagers will come in at 10 or 11 when you have we need to put toothpicks on your eyes to keep them open. That's just an analogy. And they want to have a deep talk with you then. In the car is always a great time to have a conversation. Walking and, when you're doing an activity. These are times when your kids are more likely, particularly teenagers, to tell you something that's going on for them. You want to notice what your son or daughter is saying in moments of anger and upset, because sometimes deep and important information is released in those moments. One client I work with said, that her son goes along and acts like it's fine. And then, about once a week has a meltdown. And that's when she hears how he's really doing underneath. So we want to listen in those moments. We want to use reflective listening. I heard you say this. Did I get that right? Is there anything else? We don't want to solve problems in those moments. We just want to listen, reflect, and ask, I have some ideas about that. Would you like to hear them? Or even before you ask that question, what are some of your ideas about how you might do it differently? You want to brainstorm 2 possible plans. Since we don't exactly know what's going to happen this summer, what will help is mapping out 2 possible schedules and routines that will give you a sense of control. If this occurs, if we're relying on hybrid learning and my child is going to school 3 days a week and home 2 days a week, this is a possible schedule for us. And if we have to resort to all virtual learning, this is a possible schedule for us. You want to start to plan now and prepare for the different outcomes. This will help you have a sense of control, and it will help your kids feel reassured that there's something that they can lean into. You want to be proactive, and having these plans is proactive instead of reactive. So think about potential problems that existed in the spring and how you might handle them based on what you learned. And you want to include your kids' perspectives and ideas. What I strongly recommend for families right now is a once a week family meeting. It can be 5 minutes if that's what your kids can handle. It could be 20 minutes. But you want to have a check-in about some of this at a specifically designated time. So it's not floating around all the time and you're not constantly talking about it at this time or that time. Maybe even twice a week. Maybe once a day, depending on who your kids are. Think about it like this. For those of you who have gone to college or gone to a vocational school, you might have gone through an application process. And during that application process, you may have had parents ask you, or teachers ask you on a daily basis, how's it going with your application? How are you doing with that? And how did you respond to that? For those of you who have older children who've gone through that process, you can probably remember how your kids responded to that. You know, I can say that my son was like, ugh, why can't you be more like dad? He doesn't ask me these questions every day. Of course, my thought to myself was because I'm the engine of the family, but I didn't say that. I said, fair enough. What would you like? And he said, one day. So Saturday came around. That was the day we agreed on. And Saturday morning, I said, so I'm wondering if you're going to work on your college application today. And he said, oh, why are you always bothering me? I said, today is my day. I get to ask these questions. And so we want to try to compartmentalize how we're going to deal and when we're going to deal with these issues. You want to create a new normal. So things are not the same right now, and longing for them to go back to the way they were is not going to help us problem solve right now. So it's not here, that old normal. So we want to welcome and adapt to the new rhythms instead of fighting them. I hear from a lot of parents that their kids are the ones before they leave the house who say, where's my mask? Where's your mask, Mom? Or where, Dad, is your mask in the car? Kids are starting to adapt. Kids are flexible in this way, and that's useful right now. And we want to identify what kinds of resources you have available to you right now that you didn't before. You know how we know more about the virus than we did before. So we know what safe social interactions look like. We can take out a tape measure and show our kids what 6 feet of distance is. We can exercise outside. The weather is good. Let's take advantage of it. We can try to seek an educational tutor and better intervention from schools for our kids. Next slide, please. So the first thing we want to do is realign our goals. What are appropriate goals given what happened in the spring and what school will look like in the fall in its various scenarios? So let's remember that kids with ADHD, learning disabilities, high functioning autism, or mental health issues have to work a lot harder in holding it together at school and in attending to the material, figuring out the material, and keeping their momentum going than their peers. We want to for them, spending time, on activities that are both challenging and frustrating can lead to fatigue and resentment along with decreased motivation. So whatever your child was capable of before COVID may have very little to do with what they can do right now. Even if kids are younger kids and there's a big push for younger kids to be in school, they may have a more distracted attention span than they did before. There's still a worry, particularly if you're in school with a mask on. It's literally in your face all the time. So we want to talk with kids about what they would like to achieve for themselves this year and with their teachers, and share some of your own. Create 2 sets of expectations. 2 is the big number today. The first set of expectation is based on tasks that they enjoyed in the spring and were relatively easy and interesting to them that they were able to stick with. The second set of expectations are based on subjects that they really struggled with. We want to shore up those strengths and challenges simultaneously, but not identically. It's not the same thing for the strength and the challenge. It's okay to make accommodations for tough classes in hybrid learning without giving kids a pass. And they may do better in some classes than in others because this model of learning isn't well suited to them. Above all, the most important thing we want to focus on is our connection with our kids and making them feel valued as the intelligent people they are, whose brains learn differently. We want to focus on adaptability and growing their self-esteem as well as learning. That's really important right now because there's been a lot of loss for kids, and kids aren't feeling as confident as they usually do. Slide, please. So this is our second poll, just keeping you awake here and on your toes. What gets in the way of you creating and following routines? Fatigue, frustration, forgetfulness, perceived failure, meaning it's not going to work, it hasn't worked before, why bother, or it only works for a few days, or all of the above. What gets in the way of you creating and following routines in your family? Next slide, please. So I talked earlier about prep work. So I'm talking a lot here today about preparation, because preparation builds success, builds success, reduces stress, and also increases confidence. So preparation helps us with flexibility. It lays a foundation of our internal strengths, i.e., it's like hiking up a mountain with the supplies you need for food, a medical kit, a rain jacket, a flashlight, a small towel, so you can take a little turn off the trail and soak your feet in the stream. You have the tools that you need to have a successful hike, and you're flexible in how you use them. This is exactly what we want to do for the fall. Only the tools that we need would be something like the 5 C's of ADHD parenting: self-control, compassion, collaboration, consistency, and celebration. This collaboration is a key element to the successful plan you're going to create. So make this time for short family meetings to check in every week. This is when you can discuss what's going well in your routine and what's been problematic. It also allows you to tweak things. So let's see the results to our poll. The second poll. So 31% of you say fatigue gets in the way of creating successful routines. 38% say frustration. I hear you on both counts. Forgetfulness, perceived failure, and 43% of you said all of the above. So let's make sure we address that in the Q&A later. So we need to expect that there will be an adjustment period. Okay, and this adjustment period is that as children and teens are facing returning to school, they're going to have mixed emotions. On the one hand, they may look forward to seeing friends, reconnecting with teachers, and embracing a somewhat normal schedule to their lives. On the other hand, some kids will be very nervous about changes to school, possible COVID contamination, and social interactions. We want to assist kids by empathizing with whatever feelings they're having and normalizing their excitement and their concerns. Talk with your kids about the process of adjusting and how it takes time. Adapting to this new weird normal is going to take time, but it also takes practice. Maria Montessori said, "Practice makes progress." That's what we're aiming for. So again, back at my 2, we're going to have a weekly schedule. 2, you're going to come up with 2 rough ideas that you're going to, sort of streamline and edit as you get more information from your school systems or your schools. So you're going to collaborate with your kids and their teachers on how to set up a learning plan. And you're going to have a backup option, as I said, in case whatever plan you start the school year with, you now have to shift to. So we want to make the return to academics flow smoothly. And this will show kids, these 2 options, these 2 plans will show your kids that you've got things covered. And they can now relax a little bit and trust that things are going to be okay enough, because they're not alone trying to manage it. When kids participate in setting up the routines, of course, they're going to have more buy-in, and you'll have more success. And students, especially those with learning challenges, benefit from visual cues such as lists, a whiteboard in the kitchen that they can refer to instead of you nagging and reminding them. Students with learning challenges also benefit from having a break from learning. So let's make sure that that's in the schedule. I'm going to talk about that in a minute. So incentives, not punishment, will motivate your kids for unpleasant or unsatisfying tasks until their internal reward systems kick in around the age of 21. Okay, so the late teens, early 20s for neurotypical kids, so we want to add 3 years. The goal is that you want to link the have-tos to the want-tos. And you're going to have to establish some sort of system of earning privileges that make sense to their brains as well as yours. One of the things that I've seen a lot that's happened in families in this COVID crazy time is that parents in an effort like to keep their kids, basically happy and occupied, gave away a lot of screen time. And they also gave away some of their, what's appropriate parental hierarchical authority. And so we have to figure out a way for you to hold on to that without relying on punishment. Next slide, please. So how are we going to create successful daily routines? The first thing we're going to realize is that stress and fatigue hit the weakest executive functioning skills first and hardest. So let's be aware of what your kids' executive functioning challenges are, because you can be sure that when they're stressed or tired, that's what's going to go first. Maybe it's impulse control, maybe it's emotional control, maybe it's organization, maybe it's working memory. Overall, we want to use alerts on phones and computers for reminders when classes are starting, when breaks are happening. When banners fly across the screen, kids pay attention to that. And for days when your student is home, make sure to include times in your schedule for a snack and stretch, for physical movement, chore time, and screen-free time to rest their eyes and their brains. Budget in fun screen time as well, with a baseline and additional earn time when they complete their have-to tasks. One thing I want to say about this is I want you to try to think like a camp counselor, okay? If you've never been to camp, maybe you've seen it on TV or in a movie. If you've been to camp, maybe you have some idea. If your kids have gone to summer programs, you have an idea. Camp operates in blocks. So there's like morning block, breakfast, get dressed. Then there's activity block 1. And then maybe there's a snack and stretch. Then there's activity block 2. Maybe there's lunch. Maybe that's a good time to take a walk after that. Then there might be, a final activity block. And then there's free time. Then there might be sports, or maybe then there's, rest time. Whatever it is, you understand what I'm saying. Screen time, try to think about creating a day like that and invite your kids' help. One family I work with, their 10-year-old son has started to say to him, well, I think today I'm going to do this, to say to the parents, I'm going to go home and I'm going to clean up my room, and then I'm going to read a little bit, and then when it's 11 and I can go on my computer, I'm going to do that. He's starting to formulate some idea of this routine. So before the winter comes, help your kids see their friends as much as possible. We want to review the guidelines for physical distancing, make sure they have masks and hand sanitizers with them and in their backpacks at all times. Talk with teens who won't wear their masks necessarily about what's really happening with their friends. Are people being safe? If they're not being safe, what are the ramifications, not just for those other kids, but for you and your family and you and your work? If you are an essential care worker, that's important to understand. Brainstorm together, particularly for teens and tweens, phrases they can say when situations get complicated and they perceive that it's not safe, but they don't know what to say or how to get out of it. One thing that you could set up is for them to text you a code word, and then you can call them on their phone and they can say to their friends, ugh, my mom is making me go home. And that would relieve them of the pressure of having to say, put your mask on, or why don't you wear your mask, or I'm uncomfortable. Make sure in your routine that you put in timed breaks for your kids, and make a list of choices of things they can do for short breaks, 10-minute breaks, and longer breaks, an hour. Use screen time that you're going to give your kids to meet your own needs. If you know you have meetings and your kids, try to schedule them during that time if you can. If not, give the screen time at that point and then be able to supervise them for the have-tos later. It's not ideal because we want it usually to be have to and want to, but you need support. Keep a growth mindset. You're trying something, you're trying a routine, you're trying a plan. If it's not working, that's okay. It doesn't mean it's a failure. It's feedback that you need to try something else. Ask your kids for suggestions, ask your friends for suggestions, come onto Attitude, onto the various webinars that they give, or join their Facebook page, ask questions. There's a community here for you. You don't have to do this alone. Aim for steadiness and not perfection. Be transparent when you make a change to something that's expected and give a brief explanation why, like, hey, you can have more screen time because I dropped a glass on the kitchen floor and I need to clean it up, versus your child starting to believe they can always have more screen time because you gave them more screen time tonight before dinner, but why aren't you doing it tomorrow? Next slide, please. I want to say something about inequities in access to hybrid education. Many families do not have equal access to remote learning. Remote learning has widened our socioeconomic and racial gaps enormously. I've heard stories of kids driving, teenagers who can drive 40 minutes to get Wi-Fi at McDonald's because they don't have high-speed Wi-Fi at their home, or moms parking in front of local libraries for 3 hours so their kids can have adequate Wi-Fi to do their homework, or schools blasting Wi-Fi from buses during the day. Not having adequate Wi-Fi right now is a real problem, and frankly, I think it's unacceptable as a society that this is what we're allowing to happen. Ask your school how they are going to ensure that your kids have the access they need to online learning. For educators and clinicians who are on today, be aware that parents who lack high-speed internet or possess outdated equipment won't necessarily discuss these issues with you because they're ashamed or they feel that there's prejudice that's related to that. They may talk instead about how the school doesn't have enough resources or how hard it is to get their children to pay attention. These may be true. But you want to make sure that you're asking thoughtful and sensitive questions about Wi-Fi accessibility, about the tech equipment, and how to brainstorm solutions with parents so that their students have the basics of what they need to learn. Here is something I want you to consider as well. What type of academic support did your child receive in the classroom? Does your child have an IEP or a 504? Many students who struggled online academically this spring need more support than they normally received in a classroom. Ask your child or your teen's school counselor, academic advisor, vice principal, how you can get the necessary help. Maybe you have to apply at the school district for a special ed evaluation. If you're having trouble making headway with your school district, go online and do a search for an advocate, or if you have a therapist who works with your family or a social worker, ask them to help you and attend a meeting with the school so that you have support and can ask what you want. Try to help kids connect with a teacher or a mentor weekly by phone, text, Google Classroom, Hangout, or Zoom. This one-to-one contact is really important, especially for teens. And so we want to make sure that there is some kind of one-to-one contact each week. Slide. So I want to say, I know I'm going to talk for about till a quarter of, so I'm going to say a few things about working and teaching your childcare conflicts. You as parents are living with an impossible task and frankly a no-win choice. You can work from home and teach your kids, or you can try to do both somewhat poorly. And there was a wonderful article in the New York Times a few weeks ago about the conundrum, the paradox of COVID parenting. It's like you have to choose one or the other. It's very hard to do both. So I want to just offer some empathy for that. The unending anger, frustration, and real life concerns related to this are not available for judgment. You may not judge yourself for this. Let's admit that high levels of burnout and despair are real for parents right now. It's an untenable situation. One parent said, online school was terrible. I would say it was 40% outbursts, 20% quiet defiance, 10% distraction, thinking the computer was for gaming, 25% me learning the material and teaching it. Only 5% of the effort was absorb new learning. Oh, and 200% stress for me, basically becoming a homeschool teacher. And I have another child. So you are feeling burdened by the should. Should you be enjoying this time with your kids more? Forget about the should. Let's focus on the cans. What can you do that's good enough to get by and keep your sanity and have your child learn something as well? Set clear boundaries for yourself as much as you can when you're working and when you're available and when you're not. Join others, form perhaps a homeschool group to share the supervision of kids, perhaps hire a teacher or a tutor to support your child. And you don't have to have money for this. National Honor Society students or high school seniors who need community service hours can be great tutors and role models for your kids. College students, millennials, they have a lot of time on their hands right now. A lot of them are not working. You might be able to set something up with a family friend or a neighbor. Rely perhaps on your extended family. Do you have retired family members who might be able to help with some supervision? Zoom supervision could be your friend in this case. You can't and don't need to do it on your own. Please commit to some kind of regular self-care for yourself and foster this for each person in your house. Check in. Figure out what helps you regain your sense of calm. Write this down so you don't have to brainstorm about it when you realize you have 5 minutes to yourself. Assist your kids and your loved ones to do the same. What helps your kids feel good and quiet inside? When can they relax without worrying about performing and disappointing others? Just be themselves. Whether it's Lego, reading, listening to music, a podcast, story, Sudoku, figure it out. Perhaps it's just playing with the dog. And remember, be compassionate with yourself. You're doing the best you can within a truly impossible situation. Next slide, please. I want to talk about some strategies for dealing with lying, avoidance, and pushback. Poor verbal and behavioral impulse and emotional control lead kids to say and do things they regret, and they lead us to say and do things we regret. That's that self-control, the first C. So instead of dealing with that guilt and its companion shame, kids will make up excuses or deny their actions, and they hope you'll believe what they say. This kind of magical thinking. Well, if I wish I hadn't said it, or I pretend I didn't, then maybe it didn't happen. Become a lie detective. Honesty is consistent. Lies shift and change. Rehearsed stories are usually false. Observe facial and bodily expressions. Honesty looks relaxed and open with direct eye contact. Set up reasonable consequences and ask your kids what they think should happen when they lie to you. Be predictable and fair in establishing these consequences. Whatever the consequences should fit the offense. And encourage accountability, and what that means in real time. Call me to pick you up at midnight, anytime, anywhere, with no questions at that time. Talk about what real apologies look like and what it means to make amends. Saying you're sorry and not meaning it doesn't mean much. Saying you're sorry to your sister because you pushed her and sitting down and reading a story to her means something. Kids with who learning differences are A+ avoiders. They don't like what they have to do, and they'll procrastinate so they don't have to do it. They'll lie about it, so I'm not accountable. We want to help them figure out how to approach tasks that are in front of them by breaking them down into small enough chunks that they can complete them and feel good about them. Pushback and oppositional behavior may mask other emotions such as anxiety or depression, especially in boys. Remember that kids act out when they're bored, angry, confused, frustrated, or anxious. Expect it instead of being surprised. Plan for what you're going to do by having a discussion with your kid. Okay, so the next time that you slam doors in the house, what's our plan going to be? What are the options going to be for you? Don't address problem behaviors in the moment because there's no listening. The amygdala has hijacked the prefrontal cortex and it's running the brain. We want to get the amygdala back, and that's through calm. It usually takes between 10 and 15 minutes to slow down a stress response so you're back to your baseline. Okay, next slide, please. How can you reduce family overwhelm? Remember that people can change one thing at a time. Kids, particularly alternative learners, can be overwhelmed by too many directions with too many steps, and they struggle with weaker memory often or slower processing speed. So we want to help them with their working memory and help you not be a nag by writing things down and having them work on changing one behavior at a time. Notice the progress that they're making in the process, the efforting, how they're trying, not just how they're succeeding, how they're accomplishing things. Expect your kids to struggle and be surprised when they're not. Leave them voice memos or Post-its. Next slide, please. So we want ultimately to zoom out. We want to keep our perspective here with ourselves and with our kids. Be persistent in getting the help your student needs. And if you're struggling with this, talk to your primary care provider or your pediatrician about what resources might be available to you that you are not accessing. Celebrate the wins. So we're going to notice and validate our kids when they're trying things and they're doing something different, even if they don't accomplish it. But we're surely going to notice when they do what we asked. You cleared the table as you're supposed to. High five for that. You picked up your room on Saturday per our agreement, so you can go out with your friends. Way to go. Focus on what the big goal here is. And the big goal is having and maintaining a positive connection with your child or teen. So this doesn't mean capitulating to them or handing over your parental authority. It means working with them for solutions and holding your ground when they don't cooperate. Which means that if this is what you agree to as a consequence, before the event happens, then this is what we've agreed to. Even if your kids are unhappy, we have to assist them in managing their disappointment muscle, and we have to manage ours. Make choices that support a balanced relationship. And please take care of yourself. Thank you.
Okay, thanks so much, Dr. Saline. That was filled with really great information, and we have lots of questions here. So let me just start with one that won't surprise you, and it's about Zoom fatigue. We have a sort of a continuum of questions here from people who say my child has Zoom fatigue to people who say my child refuses to do Zoom, to people who say my daughter with ADHD cannot tolerate sitting in front of a screen and just wants to move around. The general question being, here we are facing screens for school, how to handle kids for whom that is just extremely difficult by definition.
I really, my heart goes out to these kids and to you parents. I don't know about you, but those of us who are working on our computer all the time now, for me, I'm used to seeing people in person and combining that with computer work. I'm on my computer all the time, and sometimes at the end of the day, I just want to throw it out the window, And so I hear these stories from these kids. I'm like, I know what you mean. It's terrible. Nonetheless, they are supposed to go to school. And it's interesting because I have a friend who is a second grade teacher, and she was telling me, it's like, this is impossible to get second graders to pay attention online. So there are some real tools that schools can do a better job of. One is having smaller groups. So when there's a large group activity, kids are not engaged. But if it's you and 2 or 3 other kids, you can actually engage with children more directly. The other thing is to make sure that for kids who hate the computer or refuse or have Zoom fatigue, what kinds of alternatives is your school district going to offer you? They have a mandate to educate, but public schools have a mandate to educate kids. How are they going to help you deal with this? And I would do screens in very small chunks. we're going to build up the muscle. So let's just do 5 minutes. And then the next hour, we'll do another 5 minutes. And then you can start to sort of build up the tolerance for that. The third thing is that the material has to be interesting. You know, I mean, a lot of times it's just not that engaging. And so the schools are sharing material that isn't super engaging. So we want to, again, brainstorm with the schools who are mandated to teach. What kind of material would be more engaging for kids who have attention issues, and particularly little kids who don't really want to sit in front of the computer? They might sit in front of the computer to listen to a story, or they might be able to tolerate a 5-minute lesson. For those kids who are absolutely refusing online, I would encourage you to think about how the school
Sharon, we can't hear you.
You can't hear me at all? Really? How is that possible? You can't hear me? Can you hear me now?
Sharon, yes, we can hear you. So I would keep on.
Everybody, if you can hear me, would you put yes in the
Okay, can you hear me now?
in the Q&A box?
Yes, we can hear you, Sharon.
Here's Dr. Saline.
Oh, how much of what I said was missed?
We got the whole thing, actually. So since
We
I
seem
can
to
hear
have
it all.
lost sound.
Okay, so maybe Susan does.
So
I
we
think
will,
Susan actually does not
sign
have
off now. We've
that.
got a great presentation and the hour's almost up.
No, wait,
So,
wait, we have to
for those of you
communicate
who'd
with
like
Susan.
to have a chance to ask Dr. Saline the specific question.
you
She will be
communicate
on
with-
Attitude's
wait.
Facebook page today at 4
I'm
p.m.
going to say,
Facebook Live, and she'll be able to answer questions then. So, but I think you've given us lots of food for thought, and we're grateful for your presentation today.
I'm
Thank you.
emailing. Wait, I'm emailing
We're
Susan
gonna
right
sign off
now. No, I don't want to.
Sharon, I think
Yes.
since our moderator is signing off, I think that we will go ahead and end the webinar. But as Susan mentioned, everyone, Sharon is going to be on Facebook Live later today. I believe it was 4 p.m. Eastern, if that's correct, Sharon.
Yes. So since people can't hear me, what I want to say is I do see the questions, and I could answer a couple of them if you want. But what I want to respect that Susan is the moderator. And what I would encourage you to do is I do a live Facebook every week for Attitude at 4 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. This is exactly the topic I'm talking about today. So please bring your questions. I would be very happy to answer a question or two if that's okay with you, Lily, because I do see them.
Looks like we still might be picking up a bit of sound from Susan. So just to make sure that we don't have any further interruptions, I do think I'm going to go ahead and cut things off here. But
okay.
I just want to thank you again for a fantastic webinar, Sharon, and everyone. Not next week, but the week after, we'll have our next webinar, Tuesday, August 11th, on revving up your child's executive functions for a successful school year. So apologies again for this little technical difficulty at the end, but please definitely tune in to hear more from Sharon on Facebook Live later today. Thanks, Sharon.
Thank you so much, everybody. I'm sorry for the inconvenience. And please go get your free handout on pivoting toward hybrid learning, which is connected to the webinar. Thank you.
Bye.
Wait, Susan is now asking, are we ending this session? I'm not sure why.
I think we'll go ahead and end the session.
Okay,
All right.
thanks.
Bye, everyone.